Welcome back to Christology. It is Tuesday, March the 31st. This is Mr. George. I'm going to pick up where we left off last Thursday. I had asked you to read a chapter from a book by C.S. Lewis entitled Mere Christianity. The first chapter of that book is called The Law of Human Nature, and in it, our author, C.S. Lewis, speaks about something that represents how we as Christians see morality, matters of ethics, matters of right and wrong. Again, give you some biographical information about our author. Take a second look through that. You might have noticed that I misspoke and said that Lewis died in 1973. As you can see from the slides, 1963. Take a look at this information, likely to show up on a future quiz once we get rolling with some assessments on this online delivery. In that chapter, The Law of Human Nature, C.S. Lewis makes the point, the claim for the worldview called moral absolutism, that we as Christians believe that there are certain matters of right and wrong that apply to everybody, everywhere, every time and place. To believe that makes you a moral absolutist. If you say that I believe that slavery is always wrong, was always wrong, will always be wrong, then by definition, at least when it comes to slavery, you are a moral absolutist. The opposite worldview is moral relativism. Moral relativism is the idea that individuals make up moral facts for themselves, or societies invent standards of morality for themselves, and you can't really compare. It's apples and oranges. What's right for me, says the moral relativist, might not be right for you. What's wrong for you might not be wrong for me. That sounds very democratic. It sounds very fair and progressive. But if you think about the consequences of moral relativism, the logical endpoint for that worldview is not very attractive. If you are a moral relativist, you can't even say that the Holocaust was wrong, the murder of millions of Jews, genocide 70 years ago. You could say you don't approve personally, it doesn't match with your way of seeing things, or you would never do that. But by definition, the moral relativist says there's no such thing as right and wrong that we could apply 70 years later. Again, if you are a moral relativist, you can't say that murder is wrong. You can't say that rape is wrong. You could say those are things that you personally disagree with. The moral absolutist, and I would say this is an advantage, gets to say no, the Holocaust, murder, rape, those things are always wrong, were always wrong by a standard of human dignity and human nature. Those are things which do not honor the human person for who he is. Traditionally, philosophers have called that set of moral principles the natural law. C.S. Lewis calls it here the law of human nature. Put another way, the law of human nature, the natural law, is what we can know about right and wrong just through logic. You don't need the Bible, you don't need revelation, you don't need the church and its teachings. All you need is to apply your mind to the human person, his identity, and his dignity. In the second chapter of Mere Christianity, our author C.S. Lewis speaks about some possible objections we might have. That's why the chapter is just called Some Objections. He puts forward the idea, isn't this law of human nature just herd instinct, that people would disapprove if you act a certain way, and so you don't do this or that out of social convention? He raises a couple of other related questions. Don't a lot of people disagree about morality? Certain people say that abortion is wrong, other people say it's part of healthcare, and so who's to say, who's to make the judgment? And haven't different people and societies had different ideas throughout history? Isn't that proof that there is no one set of standards of right and wrong, when what the Assyrians did 3,000 years ago is so different from what the Greeks did, is so different from what was okay in the time of Charlemagne, and then later in the Middle Ages, and now in the world today. So C.S. Lewis wants to take the time to address some of these objections as he continues to try to make a case for moral absolutism and the silliness of moral relativism. Lewis wants to say that the law of human nature is much more than just instinct. Like all other animals, we as human beings have instincts, biological drives, that can come into play when we make decisions. So if I walk into the school and I see a couple of guys having a fight, maybe I have a couple of different competing instincts. We talk about fight or flight. Maybe I want to not get involved. My first instinct is to run away. Maybe a punch gets thrown my way, and so my first reaction is to fight back. In animals, the strongest instinct is the one that's going to win. If one of the lesser animals, like a meerkat or a domesticated house cat, encounters instincts that are at work in them, fight instinct, the flight instinct, whichever one of those instincts is stronger is the one that's going to win. So if lioness defends her cubs, it's not necessarily because of her high ideals of nobility and rightness, it's because her instinct as the mother of those cubs is stronger than her instinct to run away. But here's the thing about a lot of the moral standards that a lot of us would describe as being true. Uh, a lot of times it's the weaker instinct that we feel that's the one we would still say, nevertheless, is morally right. So if I walk into my classroom and I see that Danny Lafferty is about to get beat up by Gabriel McLaren, again, maybe it's the case that I want to run away. Maybe my strongest instinct is I want to avoid getting into trouble myself. But a lot of times we would say that even though your strongest instinct is to run away, that it's still the right thing to do to stay and to defend your friend. In society, we see this happen a lot. A lot of the things that in society we would say seems to be the herd mentality, seems to be the way a lot of people think, we would still look at it and say, no, in that case, that society is wrong. There were times in American society where racism was the overt norm, times in American society where slavery was the overt norm. Again, in that case, society and the people who bought into that herd instinct, they were wrong. So because standards of human dignity go beyond what our instincts merely might point us to, because we as human beings are higher than animals that are led merely by instinct, our ideas about morality, the law of human nature, the natural law, these are principles that go beyond instinct. Again, just like I mentioned, although there's been a lot of disagreement throughout history and a lot of disagreements in different parts of our towns and our churches and our states and our country and our world, even though there's disagreement about morality, that doesn't mean that there's no such things as facts of morality. Again, you can see some of the examples below. Societies throughout history have disagreed about what constitutes a full person. There have been societies that have thought that certain members of society are less than others. But that doesn't mean that was actually the case. We can look back and we can say that historically that those were misjudgments. That if when the European explorers arrived in the Americas, if they judged the indigenous peoples to be less than a complete person, that they were wrong about that, and that the injustices that followed were just as wrong then as they would be now. Again, a lot of the so-called differences in morality between various historical societies, C.S. Lewis wants to say, they've never amounted to a total difference. They've never amounted to a completely opposite morality that we could point to throughout human societies. Again, different societies have had different ideas of how wrong it would be to kill and to murder and so forth. But for whatever different ideas there might be, there's never been a society in history that said you can just walk around and kill somebody because you don't like the clothes that they're wearing. Again, throughout history, societies have viewed courage differently and have valued different aspects of bravery. But there's never been a human society, I'd suggest there's never been any intellectual or any person who's written down their admiration for somebody who ran away in battle or who failed to defend their friends. We might value different things as individuals or societies to some extent, but as human beings, and Lewis wants to make this point, there's a lot more consensus, there's a lot more in common between various religions and their moral teachings and various societies and their moral teachings than there have been differences. Another point on that is that if we want to say that there's such a thing as social progress or moral progress, by definition, we've got to be moral absolutists. Progress assumes that there's some objective standard that we're measuring things by. If I say you're making a lot of progress in my class, that probably means you're getting a lot closer to the ideas that the class is about, or maybe to put it a different way, your grade is getting closer and closer to 100%. If I say you're making progress, but there's no grading scale, or there are no ideas in this class to understand, well, then progress loses its meaning. So if we say that our society has made moral progress, if you want to say that we are better now than we were on the subject of slavery and how we think about it, or if you want to hope for moral progress when it comes to race relations, again, by definition, that makes you a moral absolutist. If you're a moral relativist and you can't even say that slavery or racism is wrong, you also can't really talk about making progress as a society or moral progress because the moral relativist says there's nothing to measure it by. A couple of final terms I want to give to you before I set you up for the assignments I'm asking you to do today and before class on Thursday. Term number one is the term culpability. We as moral absolutists would say that there are certain actions that are always wrong, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter where you are, doesn't matter when you lived. Culpability describes to what degree a person can be held responsible for their moral actions. Again, my sons repeat a lot of what they hear, and a lot of times it's not very flattering because they maybe heard me say something that I shouldn't. I'm morally responsible for the words that I say, but my kids probably are not. They just repeat what they hear. They don't know that certain things are more or less disrespectful to say. And so although I'm doing the same thing my kids are, I'm probably culpable. They're probably not. In a court of law, a jury has the job not just of determining if somebody has done a certain thing. Sometimes that's not in debate at all. But a lot of times a jury has to figure out if somebody is culpable legally for their actions. They knew what they were doing was illegal, or they should have known, and they should have acted differently. If, for example, we're not in complete control of our actions because of some sort of compromised mental state, then it might be the case that we're not as culpable for our actions. Again, you got an incomplete sentence on the slide there, but just for example, if I'm being coerced in any particular action, or if I think that my family is being threatened, maybe the fact that I do something that's illegal is something I'm less responsible for. So culpability describes to what degree I can be held responsible for my actions. Maybe you and I do the same things, but I'm less responsible, and so I'm less culpable for the fact that I carried out those acts. We also use the term conscience. The word itself, literally, if you break it down, just means with knowledge. Science, from its Latin roots, means knowledge. Con or con in the Romance languages means with. Conscience means our knowledge of the natural law, the degree to which we know what is right and what is wrong, or put another way, the degree to which we know what honors human dignity and is fitting for the human person, and the degree to which we don't know what's fitting for the human person. When it comes to our consciences, we as natural law thinkers and we as Catholics would say we've got three jobs. Number one, it's always, always, always our job to follow our conscience, meaning if there's something that you believe is wrong, even if everybody else around you is doing it, then you are morally bound to not do that thing. If there's something that you believe is right and everybody else disagrees with you, but you are truly, absolutely convinced with the knowledge that you have that it's right, then you're morally obliged to do that thing. Now, a caveat to that, the second step is that we also have the job of forming our own consciences. There are probably some of us who are overly sensitive, and maybe that we're the ones that are policing our friends, and we're always so tuned into certain things that there are some things that probably aren't really all that bad that we get all hung up about. And there are probably some things that we should be doing, but maybe we're perfectionists, we're too hard on ourselves. That being said, there are probably some of us who have pretty insensitive consciences, that we really aren't paying attention. We really aren't trying to find out what's right and wrong, or what helps other people or it doesn't. And so we're failing in our job of forming our conscience to what is actually right and what is actually wrong, or put another way, what actually honors the people around us and what actually takes away from their human dignity. So yeah, it's your job to follow your conscience all the time, but it's also your job to form your conscience so that when you follow it, what you're doing right is actually what's right, and what you avoid is actually what's wrong. Lastly, even though it's not our job to be the police for everybody around us, it is our job to help our brothers to be a good friend, to be a good brother. And especially if people are entrusted to your care, it would be your job, your step 3, to follow the consciences, to rather form the consciences of those entrusted to your leadership. Meaning, if I'm the coach of the team, or I'm the teacher in the classroom, or I'm the parent, it's my job to help to establish an environment and context where consciences are being formed. It's my job to help to teach my son that he shouldn't be hitting, and to teach him that he should be opening the door. So then when he has a formed conscience, he can follow it, and what he's doing right can actually be in accord with what's right, and what he avoids is actually the things that are truly wrong. Here's your job for today. Go to the Google form that's in today's class doc, and very simply answer the true or false question that you find there. Here's the true or false question. I agree with the principle of moral absolutism. In other words, I agree that there are at least some truths of right and wrong that are true for everyone, everywhere, regardless of race, gender, etc. An example would be murdering an innocent person is always wrong, has always been wrong, will always be wrong. You don't have a ton of options here, just true or false. Do you agree with that, or don't you agree with that? Again, by 3 p.m. today, very simply register a response, and you've completed your attendance assignment. The homework assignment for today is to participate in an online discussion board through MyCC. Poke your way around this a little bit if you haven't done this before. A lot of us probably haven't done this before. What you do is in the original assignment that's called participation assignment number 1, you write a 4 to 5 sentence post of your own. That's your own thinking. That's complete sentences, correct spelling, punctuation, grammar, clear thought. And you very simply play out some of what you said in your response to the true or false question for today's assignment. Do you agree with moral absolutism? In those 4 to 5 sentences, do you believe that at least some moral principles apply to everyone, everywhere, every time and place? So after everybody has posted, your job then is to go back into the assignment to peruse what other classmates have said in your class period, and also to post at least one 2 to 3 sentence reply. It's not enough just to say good stuff or I agree or nice job. It's your job in 2 to 3 sentences to give examples, to give evidence, to be specific, and to say, no, I really think you're off base with that, or oh, wow, that's a really good example. I think that's really true. You made me change my mind. Again, it's your job to interact with your classmates in this discussion board. For 20 points, it's both the original post, where with evidence and examples you present your own case as you agree or disagree with moral absolutism, and then in at least 2 to 3 sentences with more than just I agree, you go into detail about what about another classmate's response provokes something for you and makes you think. If you're not entirely comfortable, or if you don't believe Mr. Godfrey and me when we say that you would never lose points for disagreeing, again, you can make more general statements like if somebody disagreed with moral absolutism, here are some counter arguments they might raise, and then your classmates can reply to that. So if you're not 100% comfortable saying I agree or I disagree, then you can feel free to be a little bit more general, but still to give good examples and good evidence in your applying. Again, this Thursday, Mr. Godfrey is going to pick up with another major aspect of morality, especially when it comes to our relationships in general, and especially our relationships to women, and what's called theology of the body. Again, complete these couple of assignments. Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.